There are a number of ways to look at pricing a business, and if you're not a specialist in this, it's useful to go hire an expert to help you with the process. If you're using a bank loan to buy a business, for instance, the SBA will usually hire a company to do an appraisal or evaluation for the business. But when you just want to get a ballpark idea, or you want to get a general idea of how to either price a business to sell or to begin a price of looking to offer for buying a business, one of the ways is to look at the seller's discretionary earnings. We'll talk about what that is in a minute. Applying a general multiple and seeing if that even somewhere gets close to the green or the detail. Realize that value is something that people think about differently. One person might value a business more highly than another, and especially if it fits into a criteria of acquiring another business that makes their existing group of businesses stronger. They might be willing to pay a little bit more. Other people might be paying a little bit less. If you're selling a business, you might be interested in selling quickly and maybe sacrifice a little of the potential price in the business, etc. But this, again, is just a quick and general way of looking at an idea of understanding price for business. One of the key things I want to talk about is seller's discretionary earnings, or SDE, seller's discretionary earnings. And a real quick overview of that is to take a look at the profit that comes on the income of the taxes. It could be on the income on a profit loss statement if you don't have the taxes. And then you want to add in non-recurring expenses. A non-recurring expense is something like, well, I'm going to go through that in a minute. I'm going to go through all the details. I'm going to go through the non-recurring expenses. You take non-recurring income away, you add operating income. You can see all this stuff out, depreciation, amortization, and we'll go through that in just a second as we go through. First of all, a business could have a number of family workers that are working in the business, and they look at the business saying it earned all this money, and really it's a number of people, maybe a husband and wife, or a couple brothers or sisters, and they're working the business and they're contributing all to one income. But seller's discretionary earnings is looking at one working family member, usually working, a full-time basis in the business. And if there are other family members that are working the business that are contributing to the take-home for the business, for the family, those salaries or those expenses would be replaced with market value expenses. So as an example, real quick, if you had two spouses working together, and one was getting a $60,000 value for running the business, and the second one was working the business, and she or he was making $30,000 a year, and that was about what you'd pay somebody else to do that same sort of work in the business. You would take away $30,000. You'd only count the $60,000 of the one working owner. It's very important out there to look at that. And then you remove non-recurring income. So always confirm with the accountant. Non-recurring income happened several years ago when BP oil spilled oil into the waters, and they were giving money to a lot of businesses around the Florida market. And so that was a one-time expense or income coming in. It wouldn't repeat over and over again. Another example might be, finally winning a lawsuit, and you get this check for $40,000. Well, you don't win a lawsuit usually every year, so that would be taken away from the income. So remove that type of income. Add back non-recurring expenses. This might be like if you decide you're going to sell your business and you want to make it look really great, so you spend $40,000, $50,000 refreshing the whole inside, build a little office, replace all the seats, do the lighting and stuff like that, so it looks especially beautiful, but it's not the type of thing that you would be spending on a regular basis. There's that slide again. I'm sorry about that. Okay, let's go back to things like depreciation and amortization. Depreciation is an expense. It's not really a cost of anything. It's a number that you're allowed to subtract from your profit so that you pay less taxes. It's an incentive for business owners to reinvest in their business and continually do things. So when you take $10,000 off of your income to pay taxes on it for depreciation, it's not that you're writing a check for $10,000. You're just not putting any, you're not putting $10,000 into the expenses, and so you'd add back depreciation. Okay, amortization is like depreciation, but it deals with those things that are intangible, things you can't touch. Maybe if you bought a franchise and you were writing the $30,000 franchise off over a period of 3 years, you'd say, well, $10,000 each year for the next 3 years, I'm going to not pay taxes on $10,000 of my income. And so that money would come back again because you wouldn't have written a check for the $10,000 of amortization. That would be money that is yours. It's just written off the tax, and you want to add that back. Also, remove any non-operating income. So you might get some income. Maybe you are leasing out an office space to a business intermediary like myself. And so, when you sell the business, the new person would probably kick out that person and take over that office. If that is the case, then you remove that non-operating income. On the other hand, you might sell the business and say, I'll keep that broker in there and you can have that income. But if it's non-operating income and it doesn't really attribute to the business itself, then you remove that expense out there. And then you add back any non-operating expenses. Non-working spouse might be somebody. So we have people all the time that have a family member that works, that gets a check for the business, but she or he is not really working in the business. So let's say I'm paying a son who's going to college, and I ask him every week, hey, what do you think of the economy? And that's part of the rationale for me sending a check for $1,000 a month up to him to handle college, and I'm writing it off of my taxes. I don't know if that's legal or not, probably not, but people do things that are probably not, and I just want to make sure that we're getting the clarity of the income. That would be something that would be a non-operating expense that you'd add back. Because those people that buy your business are probably not going to write a check for $1,000 a month to your son, no matter what he has to say from his college or university. Okay, so we're going to add those things back. You certainly would include the profit, the bottom line. And now we've got this formulation for the seller's discretionary earnings. We've really quickly highlighted all these things out there: non-operating income, profit, expenses, etc. Oops, sliding back to this thing, etc. And you come up with a number. Now, quite often you're going to look over a period of time, 3 to 5 years, and if the sales are sort of up and down, you might take an average. If they've been going up over the last few years, you might highlight and weight the most current year as 80% of representation of those sales, or maybe even 100%. Usually, though, people are going to look over a period of time and look at the direction of sales. On the other hand, if your sales have been declining, as an example, let's say 3 years ago you made $200,000, and 2 years ago you made $150,000, and last year you made $100,000. Well, people are going to be very concerned about what's happening in the current future, and they might highly discount your business, saying, well, I'm concerned about the decrease in sales. Or on the other hand, if it's going up and up and up in reverse, then people are going to say, well, okay, I want to feel comfortable that it's going to continue to go up or continue to stay at this high number, but you can weight that more evenly. So a lot of times you can take an average, and it could be a multiple. So you might say the most recent year was 80%, the prior year was 15%, and the year before that is 5%, and I take an average, multiply of all those numbers, and I come up with a figure that's useful to represent, to say that sort of is my indication of my seller's discretionary earnings. And then you got to say, well, where do I find a multiple? Now, there's a lot of different industries and organizations. If you're in the state of Florida and you're part of the Business Brokers of Florida, you can look at Business Brokers of Florida and look at what they sold on the average and say, oh, I see that businesses in this particular industry have gone up and down. They've sold for these different factors out there. I pulled this information from peer comps, and this is one I'm doing just for a fitness center, and realize that fitness centers have lots of different nuances. There's cycle centers, there's full-scale fitness centers that are open 24 hours, or some that are specializing dealing with women. So you need to sort of categorize and make sure that you have as close to having that representation as you can. But you might not find that there's a ton of women's fitness centers, for instance. So you might need to look at an average that grosses up and has a representation of, in general, the type of industry that you're working with. Again, this is not exact science. It's just a tool for getting you there. Now, in this case, I pulled businesses, 124 businesses that had sales between 100,000 and 1.3 million, and that might be a kind of a high sales range, but it gives you a composite average. It shows that on the average or on the mean, these businesses had sales of about 430, and a median or middle number of 375. Why would you use a median versus the average? And if you've taken statistics or you remember from your math class, sometimes you have a list of numbers that are making this thing, and the average is one number, but the middle number sometimes is more representative because you might have something that's really expensive or really on the low end that is so different it skews up the number and throws the average off. Quite often I use the median or the middle number. Okay? These are sales prices, and by the way, I meant to say these were the sales prices they sold between 100,000 and 1.3 million. The gross annual revenue is the important factor. The smallest one had an annual average sales of 123,000, and the highest one had $747,000, and again, the average was about $417,000. We talked about that seller's discretionary earnings. So from the group of 124, the least performing one made $41,000, and the highest performing one made $441,930, with a middle number of about $147,000. Okay, EBITDA we did not talk about in this slide, but EBITDA and seller's discretionary earnings are very similar, but the difference is this. Seller's discretionary earnings is a representation of one working owner in the business, right? And we mentioned not as spouses or family members, except for one working owner. And EBITDA is what you would get if you owned multiple businesses and you paid a manager to run the businesses for you, and you would keep what was left over. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And they're very similar, except there's really the difference of the payments going to one working owner. And each of those has a different multiplier, as we'll see in a minute. So seller's discretionary earnings and revenues, the percentage of profit that takes out of it from seller's discretionary earnings on the average is about 37%, but the percentage of profit for EBITDA is about 25%. I don't really pay too much attention to these, although when I'm looking at the business I'm working with, I find out are they above or below the average of what the industry has been doing. Sometimes it gives me an opportunity to say, hey, Miss or Mrs. or Ms. or Mr. Seller, by the way, you are generating 20% and the median is really generating 37%. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for you to raise prices or get more profitability out of the business. It's just something we have a conversation with, nothing that we use really in doing the valuation. When I do, and we focus on the multiple of seller's discretionary earnings, and let's say we got $100,000 of the seller's discretionary earnings on our numbers, we would go back and we would multiply the median number, and we'd multiply 2.64 times $100,000 and say one possible pricing development, and again, this is just on a very, very high level, would be 2.64 times 100,000 or $264,000. Again, this is not for you to use the finalized terms. Always get an expert involved. Always contact your attorney. Always contact your accountant to get insights and hire a professional, especially when you're making some things. But this gives you a conversation point, a starting point on having the possibility. You could have something that's multiplied times 1.29 or as high as 4.58 times that $100,000. There's businesses in the marketplace that have had these factors. But I'd be kind of wary about the extremes. There's always reasons. Maybe this was somebody who was desperately needing to get out or falling apart or having ill health problems. Maybe this one involved a family transition or some sort of special circumstances that led it to be so high. But I look at that median number. Again, if you want to calculate the EBITDA, which we talked about, and what you get out of your business if you paid a manager to run it full time, the multiplier would be a higher number, 3.72. Again, this will give you a high number. There's a third criteria that you could use to apply, and that is to look at your total sales. Let's say you're making $1 million, and I'm just using that number to keep it really easy. You could see that if a business was doing $1 million, on the low end, you'd call 0.31 times $1 million, and you come up with $310,000. On a high end, $1.88 million, and on an average, 0.92, or on a median, I should say, to be precise, 0.92 times $1 million or $920,000. Again, I'm just making up these numbers. This is just a general criteria, and I hope this is helpful to you. Again, keep in mind the formulation here, and if I can be of any help, reach out to our company. This is Brian Stevens, 833-BuyBiz1, or you can check out our website at BuyBizUSA for more information. We're glad to help you out. Take care, and I hope this is helpful. Remember to contact professionals. This is just generally to give you an idea of one way to take a look at value in business. Bye-bye.